Hello and welcome to Take Me Home, the podcast offering a social democratic alternative for the politically homeless. I'm Hilary Salt.
And I'm Sebastian Moore.
And we're joined today by Toby Marshall, who is a A-level film studies teacher and has been for over a couple of decades now. And he is here to talk to us about the broader subject of education. Welcome, Toby.
Welcome. Yeah, well, thank you for inviting me.
Great.
I was just thinking when you're introducing Toby then, what image people might have before it cuts to him, a film studies teacher. And he's got like the sort of the Jeff Goldblum sort of hair and the glasses. I feel like you're fitting that image really well.
No, do carry on.
Great. And it feels good to be talking about education now because there's a feeling in the air, isn't there, that back to school next week. I was in the park yesterday and there were a lot of kids making the most of their last week of freedom.
It's terrifying. It was the worst period of the year for me as a kid. I hated the thought of going back to school.
Oh gosh,
Yeah.
Right. So a good time to do education. And Toby, you wanted to approach this by talking about a specific book, didn't you?
Yeah, that's okay. I've just finished reading it over the summer. Nick Gibb's Reforming Lessons. And for those that don't follow education that closely, Nick Gibb was School and Standards Minister on 3 occasions during the previous administration. So he was there with Gove at the beginning, with all the hoo-ha, out of office, back in, out of office, back in. And he describes himself as the institutional memory of education because he's actually chalked up one of the longest careers in front bench, in a front bench education position out of anyone in a long time. They come and they go, but he was there for a long time.
It was always the same with pensions as well. The pensions ministers never lasted very long.
Yeah. So, Hilary, you asked me to say what I think should be done in education, or kind of what our priorities should be. And I might be slightly disappointed because, and this is one of my kind of points about this book, is there's a lot of things that are going well, and we shouldn't neglect the things that are going well. And I often find I'm 52, Hilary, and increasingly I get accused of being a centrist booster dad. And I reply to him, I say, oh, well, we all want the same things, don't we? And it's all going to work out all right in the end anyway. But I think it does depend on the issue. But I think in education, there's good cause for celebration and pride in some of the achievements of this country. And I think there's also a case for, which I'll explain a little bit before I go on to the book, of perhaps being less partisan on this particular issue than we would be on other ones. So I'm going to dial down the melodrama, if that's okay, on this issue, because there's a lot of melodrama in education. So what do I think? I think, broadly speaking, in many ways, over some painful political moments, there's a lot that's working rather well institutionally. There's lots of things that are being achieved within education. What I think, and it might well be the case that not everyone agrees with me on in the SDP, but it's a debate. I think what we need to do in education is keep up the arguments for a liberal, so that's one that respects individual freedom, traditionalist and teacher-led view of education that focuses on the transmission of powerful knowledge. I think what we're doing in education is we're not changing the structure of society. Often people think we can move society back to sort of golden age through education or move it forward to some nirvana. And I don't think that's what education does. Education isn't about changing the societal structure. It's about handing over knowledge to the next generation so that they might themselves do that and decide how they want to run the country. And I think that's one reason we should try to be less partisan, which doesn't mean not having arguments, but trying to think about the general good in relation to this specialized institution. So I think also we need to continue to clarify what education can and cannot do. One of the things about education, aside from people being, I think partly education is a metaphor for society. So if people are feeling alienated, they will often project that onto education. And education can easily become a dumpster. It can become society's dumpster. Any problem, let's solve it through education. And what that does is it clutters it up with things that aren't necessarily educational. Now, I think what we need to do is argue for strong boundaries between education and politics. Education is not a place that you indoctrinate people in. We have political arguments as adults in the outside world, and that's great. It's lively. That's democracy. But we don't do that within education. There needs to be a boundary between education and politics. And actually, I think in many ways, because there is quite a strong liberal educational tradition in this country, we're actually quite good often at maintaining that boundary. Teachers often get it wrong. Everyone's going to make mistakes. But I think the boundaries are important and they should be maintained. And because of those boundaries, many great things happen within the English education system, in spite of our wider social problems. And that brings me on to Nick Gibb's book, right? Because,
just before you start the book,
yeah,
do you had a question?
Yeah, I was just wondering, because you said it's education's perhaps not such a partisan subject or policy area. I wonder do you think that's partly because in education there are certain binary metrics that you can use, and especially when it comes to something like maths, we can assess how well students are doing in maths, and we can compare that against how well students are doing in maths in the US or other countries.
Yeah. Well, when I say partisan, I think people see education often as a mechanism for resolving societal problems, which ought to be resolved elsewhere. And that's why the temperature gets so raised on educational issues, because it appears that societal collapse or societal transformation rests on what happens within education. And I think we need to accept that we have a differentiation of social institutions. Different social institutions have their own internal goals and they perform different functions. And so I think that's why it becomes very partisan. Now, there's a possibility here that I sound a bit Panglossian, but that's partly in the context of everyone being deeply cynical about politics. At the same time, whilst I don't think we should be partisan in a political way about education, that doesn't mean anything goes, or all things are equal, or all views of education are equally legitimate. But I think what we have to train ourselves to do is to make sure that we're having an educational discussion when we're talking about education, as opposed to using education as a political metaphor. And that takes some doing. And of course, schools are part of society. They're not apart from society. So it's not an absolute separation between the two things. And it takes some delicate footwork. Now, we have a long tradition of state education and education more broadly in this country. And we've got quite a refined set of procedures for kind of articulating this boundary between education and politics. But each generation has to relearn those, and those boundaries have to be re-articulated. So I think I'd argue we've achieved a great deal. There's lots that's going well. There's plenty about the English state education system that we can rightly be proud of. But we need to continue making the argument that makes those achievements possible. And we need to resist this dumpster urge of just saying, we've got this problem, the school's going to sort it out.
Yeah.
or colleges are going
I
to sit out.
I
And
think
teachers are guilty of that as well.
I think that becomes a bit of a last resort argument for people when they're criticizing something and someone says, okay, well, what do you do with it? And if you've got no other solution, you just say, it all comes down to education, really. I often think that's when you hear that, you realize that somebody's kind of run out of solutions. It's just a sort of Hail Mary as, the current generation are lost. So we just have to, train up the next generation to be a little bit kinder and a little bit more sympathetic, or whatever. So I think you're right in that regard. I was just wondering on this issue of partisan. I was sort of interested by this because I think, and I'm sure you're going to go into this about particularly the Conservatives' record in education. I have heard people from across the spectrum commending it and criticising it. So I'm wondering if education somehow does cut across the political spectrum, and maybe that's partly because we all sort of have a similar goal, and a bit like what you were saying, we all want the same thing, which is, to pass on our knowledge, or the knowledge that we have, to the next generation, and to raise, well-rounded individuals.
Well, sadly not. We don't all want the same things within education. I mean, there's a lot of people who would argue against, and then we wouldn't be discussing it if that wasn't the case, against the knowledge-focused form of education. But I would stress that that's an educational argument. That's
Exactly.
one that's internal to the institution, internal to the area of life. And I'm not arguing that we shouldn't have that argument, or that argument is a really important one to have. And I wouldn't argue that people who are not teachers shouldn't be having that. I mean, education belongs to everyone, right? In a democracy, it's everyone's property. Everyone's got a right to have a view on it. So I'm not arguing against arguing. I'm arguing for arguing, but differentiating our arguments a bit, and creating a space to allow education to focus on its internal goals.
So what does Nick Gibb say?
Right. So Nick Gibb, it's a very important first draft of the last chapter of England's national educational story. It's certainly not going to please everyone. And interestingly, people who are very opposed to a knowledge-focused version of education, they will outright condemn it. But I think also some who are more traditionalists will scoff, and partly because education is a metaphor, because people see so many problems in society, they can't imagine that actually some things could be going okay within education. Gibb himself claims that the secret of his success, and England has gone up significantly in international comparisons during the period of his administrations. Interestingly, this is maybe for another podcast, Scotland has gone down, Wales has gone down. What's the difference between, culturally very similar forms of funding? In fact, Scotland's better funded in its schools. Gibb claims there was a golden trio, three things that animated his policy: a focus on knowledge, a focus on teacher authority, and bearing down on poor student behaviour and giving schools the tools to tackle student behaviour. He says these are the things that differentiate England as a jurisdiction from Scotland and Wales. The devolved administrations didn't go down that route. And of course, Scotland has a very proud educational tradition.
It does.
And it hasn't been doing well. And they went down a different route. Gibb calls it a battle of ideas. So this is why I'm not saying, when I say let's try not to be partisan, I'm not saying that doesn't mean arguments. The arguments are really important. He calls it a battle of ideas. And interestingly, in part, it recapitulated the old debate between progressives and traditionalists, but he said the focus was on pedagogy. So how you teach, that was the thing that he claimed was the breakthrough moment. Rather than making a case for tradition in general, he made the case for a certain form of pedagogy, one that was rich in knowledge, involved direct teacher instruction, systematic checking of student understanding, and encouraging student retrieval. So once you've taught something, students then do something with it. His claim in the book is that he wanted to create a self-correcting system that was less governed from the center. And I think a lot of people will really scoff at that point, because teachers do feel very controlled, and compared to the past, there's a whole vast array of levers that the state uses to direct the activities of school. But nonetheless, his claim is he created a high autonomy, high accountability system. And I think a lot of the pushback will be, I'm guessing, not so much the level of control. And there's got to be a level of control, right? In a democracy, government decides ultimately. But we need to be careful not to go too far with that, because you undermine the professionalism of people. You want people to be active decision makers, to be creative. But I think some of the pushback will come from the fact that ultimately a lot of people within the profession didn't agree with his view of education, which is a liberal traditionalist one. So it certainly felt as if government was forcing this thing through against the will of teachers.
And just Toby, just explain to us, for those of us who are not kind of specialists in this area. So the kind of other side of that argument, that those would be teachers who believe in things like child-centered learning and
discovery-led.
Yeah, progressive education.
Yeah. So when you talk about a liberal education, you're saying it's more kind of standardized, it's more old-fashioned, if I might use that word, level of way of educating people, rather than the kind of child-centered thing that perhaps has been the focus of schools for quite a lot of years.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say, in a sense, they're two forms. Both the traditionalist and the progressive point of view in education could be both subsumed within liberalism. The liberal traditionalist point of view would emphasize the teacher and the body of knowledge that has to be transmitted, hence liberal traditionalist. But it wouldn't necessarily be conservative, because the aim isn't to force a child to think something, whereas the liberal progressivist one is more the kind of discovery method, student-centered. They discover, they find out for themselves.
Because I think you're speaking quite broadly about this period of government and what they were trying to do. Could you give us some examples of kind of what would you say are the positives that they managed to achieve during that period?
Well, you can talk about the education system in terms of three parts. So there's curriculum, pedagogy, and assessment. They rewrote the curriculum, so they launched a new version of the national curriculum, which focused very much more on knowledge, very much in contrast to the curriculum that was developed under Gordon Brown's administration, which was very progressivist. So the curriculum changed. Pedagogy changed, which is how you teach, and that's directed very much by Ofsted. And Ofsted changed its criteria for assessing the quality of teaching to focus more on knowledge. Then there's assessment or examinations, and also, if you like, the performance management of institutions. And the GCSEs and A-levels were rewritten according, and the government, I mean, this is, where the point about high autonomy, you could question it, but the government very actively directed what the new GCSEs should look like and what the new A-levels look like. And in my subject, for example, it became significantly more academic, and also more focused as a subject. I mean, essentially film became a form of art history. They introduced aesthetics as a phrase, and we're all like scratching our head, like that sounds really clever. What in the hell is aesthetics? And of course, from Greek philosophy. So they kind of rewrote, directed the rewriting of the GCSEs and A levels, so that they focused more on a traditional view of education. Now that was comprehensive. That was significant, and I approve of those changes.
Okay.
So that's an achievement, I think. And because I kind of research around education as well, I've looked at every version of the national curriculum. There's criticisms you can make of the new one for sure. But in terms of being focused on knowledge, it's the best of the versions that have been produced to date. And one is being rewritten at this moment. So the Labour Party is rewriting the curriculum, and they'll be changing assessment and the emphasis of Ofsted, which is why it's important that teachers get out there and make the argument. I think my reading of where Labour's going to go on now, traditionally, Labour has been more sympathetic to the progressive point of view. Conservatives have been more sympathetic to the liberal to the liberal traditionalist point of view. I think with Starmer's administration, it's far from clear which way they're going to jump on this one. And so all of us, parents, teachers, politicos, anyone who's engaged and concerned, need to make those arguments to encourage it to maintain the achievements of the last administration.
Is there any value in the criticisms that are sometimes made of the teaching unions as being actually quite damaging to the education system, or is that just hyperbole?
Well, I'm NEU, okay, and who's going to have my back in a redundancy situation?
Absolutely,
NEU, they're my comrades.
Yeah.
There's criticisms that could be made. I think this tendency to see education as a project of social transformation is quite common in the NEU. But sometimes when you actually read their statements, they're a bit more nuanced and sophisticated. So they also play the bogeyman kind of role in the right-wing press. Primary school teachers have got a lot of political leverage. They can close the country down, right? If they go on strike, it becomes very difficult for people to go to work. So they're in a very strong position politically, and they have quite a lot of power. I don't think they're the cause of all the problems. And I object to the way that the Conservatives have thrown around this term, the blob, as if there's a kind of unthinking mass of people out there in areas of politics that they don't agree with, that you can't win the arguments with. Which brings me to my criticism.
Great. I was about to say,
as if I planned this. I'm just rambling here. But, if I was going to make one criticism of this book, even though I think many of the reforms were good, which isn't going to make me popular, I think one of the things is that Gibb focuses very much on the means of education and the techniques of education. And they're very into evidence-based, which is a very narrow definition of what we mean by evidence-based. And randomized controlled trials. This will win the argument. If I produce this bit of academic evidence, I'm going to persuade people to adopt a liberal traditionalist view of education. And I think that's my criticism of the text, is there's not enough focus on the fundamental ends of education. Why are we doing what we're doing? Which is a philosophical, sociological question. And there's too much emphasis on this randomized controlled trial demonstrated that this is more effective, which often it's true as it happens, like if you introduce people systematically to knowledge, they're going to know more. But I think we need a few more lyricists of liberal education, singing the song, making the case of the beauty of knowledge. and the great things that you can encounter within education. And I think it's at a level that we need to have the discussion and have the discussion again. And I think there's maybe an element that I sensed a bit that Gibbs a bit of a conciliator. Because once you start talking about the ends of education, that's quite zero sum. Like, I'm right, you're wrong. Let's have the argument out. And that can be tiring and difficult. And but that's the level at which I think we need to have the major argument in terms of the battle of ideas. I think if you look over time, evidence will say all kinds of things, and it's quite a weak prop for that. The view of education that I'm advocating. I'll put it like in parody form. I couldn't care less whether a randomized controlled trial said that I should or should not teach Shakespeare. I'm going to do it anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's kind of so secondary, that stuff. And I think that's the level at which we need to have the argument out. And I think we need to have the argument out. This would be my criticism of the Conservatives, one of them. We need to have that argument out with a level of respect. You're not a moron because you disagree with me.
Yeah.
Progressive education, there's some brilliant stuff. Margaret Mead, Children's Mites, Margaret Donaldson, sorry. Some great Dewey, there's some fantastic philosophy related to, and sociology, anthropology related to progressive educational ideas, Piaget, people like that. These are not morons. What they're trying to understand is the agency of the learner and of the child. And of course, knowledge is not an inert thing. You have to exercise agency within the acquisition of knowledge. You have to do things. It's a practice as well. It's not just a book. You have to internalize it. You have to debate it. So I think, with respect, we need to have the argument rather than calling people the blob or whatever, because good teachers, in fact, engage with their students, and think about how it is that you might come to not just be taught something, but understand it, which requires the agency of the learner. Education is a commodity. It's not something you can purchase. It's something you've got to exercise agency in relation to. There's a person behind it. And I think that explains the persistence of progressive educational ideas, because that chimes with the experience of teachers. They're trying to energize young people to encounter, engage, criticize ideas. And the persistence of the ideas is not because they're moronic or difficult or the blob or unthinking. It's actually part of the experience of being a teacher. And as a teacher, that's the most rewarding bit. The most rewarding bit of being a teacher is when you start to step back and you stop doing. Now, there's a lot of work that goes prior to that point. But it's when you step back and then they're criticizing you, they're arguing against you, they're exercising agency in relation to the things you've introduced them to. And I think that comes at the end of the process, not at the beginning. That's the fallacy in progressive educational thinking. But at all points, people are exercising agency, and it isn't just about the teacher. So, I think you have to recognize. I think anyway. Maybe I'm like being too sympathetic, but ideas exist for a reason. Not because people are stupid, because they capture part of the human experience or the teaching experience. So that's why respect is important, and also acknowledging what your opponents have actually captured in their ideas, which doesn't mean saying, okay, that's okay, we can just agree to disagree. It just means getting the argument at the right level, I think. They were, in the early days of that last administration, in the Gove era, I think they were phenomenally ill-disciplined in the way that they went about the argument, and it became too much associated with one political party. And I think that can be quite damaging. 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 And I as if knowledge was the property of the Conservative Party. That became very problematic. In the end, it cost Gove his job, but I do think at the beginning he behaved more like a Daily Mail journalist sometimes than a minister of state. Yeah.
And I suppose if we now have this new proposals for education from the Labour Party, I suppose this is an opportunity to have some of those debates in public.
Absolutely. I think absolutely crucial that we do that. As it happens, I think from what I'm picking up, I don't know which way they're going to jump. I think the Labour Party are in listening mode, and they don't want to repeat the Gordon Brown time where they really thinned out the curriculum, and they got a roasting for it, quite rightly. And I don't think I got the feeling they don't want to fall into that trap of being the dumbing down party. They really don't want to do that. I don't.
Good.
I might be wrong.
Yeah.
I've had a few discussions with people, and some of the people in the team that are looking particularly at the curriculum assessment, some of them are good. So, and it's not all down to them. It's our education, right? It's society's education. So let's get out there and make the argument.
Yeah. Sounds like a topic for an SDP debate at some point.
It does, doesn't it? I was just listening, thinking that, and I agree with you on so much, Toby, but I was listening, thinking that there might be teachers, and quite a few friends of mine are teachers, that would be listening, thinking we are being too complimentary to our education system as it currently is. And I know we're primarily talking about primary and secondary school, but I think a lot of teachers feel like the schools don't have their backs. I think that there's a massive problem with one of the let's say the strides forward that we made in better dealing with students with special education needs has now been sort of subsumed by this overdiagnosis. And I mean, in a lot of schools, they'll have, I don't know if this is a nationwide thing, but I know a lot of the schools that my friends work in, students will have an exit card. I think I've mentioned this before, so that they can sort of play their exit card at any point and they can say that the lesson is becoming too much for them, their anxiety is high, and they can go out. And one of my friends who's a teacher, she said she's walking around the school and there's just students everywhere during lesson time. She's like, what are you doing here? Oh, I've got an exit card, I'm allowed out. And so there's a lot of this where it feels to me that there has been some improvements, but I feel like we're not ambitious enough, because education, it's how many other areas would you look back 60, 70 years and see so little improvement? And you might say, well, education is sort of a stalwart of human history, that there can't be that many improvements made. But I do feel like we're still living in the past somewhat, and we haven't got to where we could get with education. I think we need to be a bit more ambitious. Would you agree with that?
Oh yeah, for sure. I'm not saying that there aren't problems, and I think you're right. There's an overdiagnosis of some stuff, which doesn't always help people. But maybe this is the centrist dad booster talking. I mean, because I'm 52, right? So I've been doing it for 25 years. I look back at my A-levels. Now, I had fantastic A-level teachers. They were proper disciplinary experts. They knew their stuff, and they sung the song of it. And by God, they had authority because they had so much knowledge. But I was set one essay during my A-levels. Okay, now that's just kind of one story. Now, over a long period of time, we've evolved a system which encourages more of a focus on getting more people through at higher grades. And I'll give you another story. My school, I was at school just before the introduction of the national curriculum. I tended to hang out with the bad lads. And
why does that not surprise me?
Well, but a core of them just disappeared at 14. Now, they were supposed to be in school. I know where they were. They were down the pool calf, which is where I was, playing video games, eating chips, and no one bothered because they were focusing at the top end and the ones that would like to get results in GCSE. So I'm definitely not saying there's not significant problems. I don't want to be a complete, pangos about all of this, but I'm just saying the broad trajectory of where we've got to on education is some significant improvements, and each generation will have a different set of problems to confront. It's never a finished thing, and what we value in education will change over time, and there'll be a different emphasis. I suppose I bridle against. Maybe I've become part of the system.
Part of the blob.
Maybe I should become a manager. Sometimes I feel I'm like speaking like a manager of education, because I'm not. I think there's much that's been achieved, and we need to identify what's working and what isn't working. And I actually think there's a lot. Take the A-level system of this country, which promotes specialization. There's an argument against so much specialization at A-level. A-level's mostly my experience. But, we push students pretty hard, and they achieve some great things. So, disappointingly, I don't have a radical critique.
Well, achieving great things sounds like a good place to end that discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think education, we're finding this in this conversation, is that it's such a broad topic. It covers so much. And within our politics, we sort of relegate it to a small area where we might focus on education. Like, we haven't spoken about it enough, I don't think, on this podcast, but we should speak about it more, because there's so many different elements to it.
Exactly. Yeah. So great. Thank you so much for all your input.
Most welcome,
Toby. So now, Culture Club.
Okay, so I believe you have something for Culture Club today.
Yes, I do. I thought, given your film studies background, Toby, it would be remiss of us not to talk about films, really. And I know you want to talk about one in a moment, but I very rarely go to the pictures, as I call them. So the last film I saw was the remake of West Side Story, which I really enjoyed. But I did go to the pictures the other week because my sons were up, and we had just come back from the Edinburgh Comedy Festival, Fringe, and they suggested we go to see The Ballad of Wallis Island, which is Tim Key.
Tim Key?
Yeah.
Who your son looks like?
He does a bit, yes. Yeah, it's got to be said. Isaac and Tim Key are a bit of a lucky likeys, yeah. And it was great. I really enjoyed it. I suppose one thing to notice is that cinemas have changed a lot, haven't they? So, there used to be these multiplex, plasticky places. And
when did you last go?
Well, years ago, yeah. And now it's kind of, you can get a cocktail, there's nice seating. It's very small. There's about 50 people. This is in my local area in Stanley Square in Sale. We got a drink, we had some popcorn. Didn't cost a huge amount, because generally that used to, cost an arm and a leg, didn't it? What you were going to take into the pictures with you. But it wasn't. It was entirely reasonable. Anyway, that's all by the by. But the film was great. Really enjoyed it. And I know you want to see it, so I don't want to give away any spoilers.
What's it about without spoiling
So the broad story is that a band comprised of a man and a woman get back together to give a private performance on an island in the wilds in Wales to an odd millionaire. That's the kind of the whole basis of the film, and it's really nice. It's emotional and engaging without being overly sentimental, and it's very, very funny at the same time. So I really enjoyed it. I would definitely recommend it. Have you seen it, Toby?
No, I haven't seen it. No,
I would
glad
suggest it.
You've enjoyed your return to cinema,
Yeah.
and you've now experienced that they segment the market a little bit, and there's nice little bougie ones where you're allowed to have a drink and a leather chair, and
Yeah.
even
for the fancy folks.
Yeah.
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 So they've definitely come on. I must say, before I forget, because you mentioned West Side Story,
Yeah.
I did a program on versions of Romeo and Juliet for Bedfordshire Health Radio, where I've got a kind of film slot, and you must watch Franco Zeffirelli's 1968 version of Romeo and Juliet. If you haven't seen it, it's just absolutely fabulous. It's kind of one of the best filmings of Shakespeare I've seen, and it's difficult to do Shakespeare. There's a lot of words
Yeah.
and a lot of really good words. So you've
And
got to
no
make a film.
singing.
There's one song in it. There's no
Okay.
singing in this one.
Okay.
But yeah, so
You
check
reversed
that
To
one.
singing.
I love singing.
Oh, you do?
I like the musicals.
Okay.
I'm going to see Moulin Rouge tonight, actually, at the theatre.
Arguably America's greatest art form.
The musical.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Oklahoma.
no one dances like the Americans.
No. They're all my favourites, all those ones. Yeah.
So you've also brought a film to Culture Club, and I'm intrigued because I really want to know kind of what your likes are, what your preferences are with cinema.
I guess I'm more a kind of classic era Hollywood person. My favorite cinema is Italian cinema. They're just the most remarkable storytellers.
Okay, give us an example of a film.
Well, I would say the one that's amazing is The Leopard.
Oh, I've read The Leopard.
Yeah. The film is, but Italian cinema is very varied. It's kind of horror, it's thrillers, it did a lot of historical epics in the kind of 60s and 70s. Then you got Sergio Leone marching into America and telling them how to make westerns.
Right.
So yeah, they've got a fabulous kind of range, but there's a sensitivity to visual storytelling and color in Italian cinema, which I find forever enchanting. But I was going to talk about Superman.
Yes.
Okay. Wow, that's very different to Italian cinema of the 60s and 70s.
You asked me, are there problems in cinema? I mean, so one of the big discussions is about Marvelization, which relates partly to the kind of remake thing. And I tend more to the kind of critical side on it, partly because I'm trying to challenge my students because they like Marvel comic book adaptations. Now, Martin Scorsese, who's one of my favorite directors, just watched The Age of Innocence. Wow, what a film that is. A period drama of manners. So you can do anything, Scorsese. He makes the point that the real problem with Marvel movies is they're like theme park rides. You know you're not going to die. Like the destination is given. They're emotionally safe. And I think there's a lot of that in mainstream American cinema at the moment. And they've sucked up a lot of the budget and the energy. But, Oppenheimer last summer, lots of young kids went to see Oppenheimer, so we shouldn't be defeatist about it. Alan Moore, who was the cartoonist for, the writer for 2000 AD and The Watchmen, he goes further. He says, Marvel superhero movies are a precursor to fascism. They're infantile regression because you see the world in this binary good, bad.
Wow.
And he's a major contributor to kind of comics, and he's kind of stepped away from it because he sees it as very dangerous. Now, he's going too far. I think Scorsese's right. The criticism of them should be not the fantasy or that they have kind of clear good and bad. It's just that they're emotionally safe, I think. Too many of them are emotionally safe. Now, James Gunn, who's a kind of rising superhero film maker, he's got Superman out at the moment. I went with my son and I saw lots of happy faces.
How old's your son, Toby?
Oscar's 18.
Right, okay. It's not 5-year-old. So
No. There were lots of grown-ups there as well. Okay. So he's retaking the Superman story. Now, his twist on the story, without giving too much away, is he has to reject his father, who, rather than being a spiritual heir of goodness, is actually kind of proto-fascist, Nietzschean sort of type father figure, and the people from Krypton are going to dominate. And so Superman, to become Moses, essentially he becomes Moses. He's going to lead us from the desert, has to reject his father. So that's the kind of twist on this one. And I went back and I looked at the 1978 version of Superman, and just sort of thought about what was good and bad, and the kind of comparisons. And I think the thing for me, so this is going to be bad news. We've had good news on education, bad news on films.
Okay.
The thing for me that was missing in the film, which was very present in the 1978 one, which I was expecting not to like it when I rewatched it, is basically it's this really clever device which the originators of the comic book came up with, of this split personality. So Superman is Superman, and then he's Clark Kent, and Clark Kent knows Lois Lane, but doesn't know he's Superman. So this sets up this tension in the audience that you want her to recognize him as Superman and man. And that's the thing I think that drives the 78 version, this romance between the two of them, the struggle for him to be recognized by Lois Lane. And that is absent in the contemporary one. They kind of, the love element of it, there's lots of fun humor in it, but the love element of it, I think, is missing. And I think the director compensates for this lack of emotion by introducing a third character, the super dog. So there's a super dog. Now, nobody's ever going to dislike a little white fluffy dog that's its master. But I think he's kind of compensating for the absence of romance between Superman and Lois Lane by introducing this kind of fluffy dog element. And yeah, Christopher Reeve in Superman, just so interesting to look at. He's got these kind of very striking kind of features, and he's kind of like muscular dork. So there's this kind of interesting kind of thing being set up in it. Margot Kidder, they went through 100 actresses to find Margot Kidder as the kind of second to him in Richard Donner's Superman. And we so want them to get together. That's the kind of thing that kind of drives the thing. And I felt it was a bit absent in the recent one. And I think I often tease my students. I'm just winding them up when I say, I'm not sure this is true, but people fear love.
Yeah, I think it is true.
People find it very hard to just do. I show them, by the way, Brief Encounter. Brief Encounter, the wartime movie, end of the war movie, which is like truly romantic British film. We just don't get straight romances. We have a difficulty with articulating that, which always makes me think, why do people fear love today so much? Commitment, loss of control. I mean, it's out of control, isn't it? You know, like when you fall in love with someone, everything goes out the window. So, but yeah, also maybe changing social conventions around the family. People don't feel the urge to settle down in the way that they used to. Well, we could start talking about a number of children.
I was going to say, well, you're going a little bit off topic now, I suspect.
Yeah, I was here for it. I'm loving it.
So we'll put the details of the new Superman in the show notes and the old Superman.
Definitely.
Can I also, I watched a film.
Oh, you did as well.
I watched a film.
Oh, yeah, what was that?
After I watched it, I thought, I've got a Culture Club item. And this was before I knew that we were going to do a film special. So I thought, I will throw in a third one, if that's okay.
Go for
I watched All the President's Men from 1976.
I've not seen it, but I read about that.
And so it's about the Watergate scandal, of course, which is the attempted cover-up of the break-in of the Democratic Party headquarters, which eventually caused Richard Nixon to resign, the only US president to ever do so. And I was really impressed with it. I thought it was
Yeah.
wonderful.
I've
And
seen that. That's one of the few films I've seen. It's a great film.
so you've got Dustin Hoffman
Yeah.
as Carl Bernstein and Robert Redford as Bob Woodward. And they're the two Washington Post journalists who spend years really trying to uncover this.
Yeah.
And the reason I thought it was really good is firstly that there is a subtlety to cinema, I think, back in that time that we don't seem to have nowadays. And probably it does exist nowadays, but it's reserved more for independent films and smaller budget films. And I really like the slowness of it, of like certain shots of him walking up the stairs where he would meet the Deep Throat, which was this his source in the White House, and you'd meet him in this underground car park. And it gives it room to breathe. So you're there with the character. And what I really liked about it was that I'm learning about this historical event that I've read about many times before. But whereas when you read about it, you're reading information that wasn't yet known at the time.
Yeah.
So what you're doing in the film is you're following the discovery of that information through the character's eyes. And I thought that was brilliant. One criticism of the film is that I feel like the ending sort of fell flat a little bit because, and I don't know why they decided to do this, but they sort of, they just kind of brushed over the fact that Richard Nixon resigned afterwards. And I thought they could have built up to that a little bit more and shown a bit of a vindication in a way that is reminiscent to me of a film called Dark Waters with Mark Ruffalo, which is again a very similar thing in the theme, which is him trying to uncover this scandal. And I felt like that did it much better at the end, where he's finally vindicated for all of his hard work. But overall, really enjoyable. I'd recommend All the President's Men.
Yeah.
Great. So that was a jam-packed culture club for everybody this week, isn't it? And lots of recommendations for us to put in the show notes. But really enjoyable.
Really enjoyable. Thank you so much for imparting some cinematic wisdom on us, Toby.
Oh, you're too kind. Again, you're too kind.
Very much enjoyed it. Thanks everybody for watching / listening. We will see you again next week. Don't forget to do all the usual things like subscribe, like the channel, recommend it to your friends. And thanks again for watching. Bye.
Cheers.
Okay, ta-ta for now.